Hi everyone, I wanted to talk about the prefrontal cortex. Excuse me, I'm sick right now, so I apologize. The prefrontal cortex is located at the front of our brain, behind our forehead, and I think it's a really interesting part of our brain. It's responsible for a lot of higher brain functionings, things like decision making, planning, controlling our behaviors, like inhibition, things like stopping us from like saying the inappropriate things in public and things that we would regret. It's responsible for social interactions, understanding others, plays a big part in our self-awareness and our attention. It's a major area for synaptic pruning. We have a lot of gray matter in that area that gets reduced once it starts getting reduced once we hit puberty and into our 20s. And we get rid of those connections that we aren't using in order to allow the ones that we are using really kind of like take center stage, take control. Um, there's a lot of cases where we've seen that like damage to the prefrontal cortex causes significant issues with controlling our behaviors, our memory function. There's the famous Phineas Gage one from 1848 where he had a railroad accident. Also, another thing is a recent research study in 2007 by Tanji and colleagues where they discovered that the lateral prefrontal cortex is a central mechanism responsible for our behavior, especially when related to planning. And I think that that's really interesting. Last semester, I wrote a paper about child brides, and I had came across this UK cognitive neuroscientist named Sarah Jane Blakemore, who was really fascinating, and she does a lot of studying of adolescent brain development. And through learning from her, learning more about the roles that the prefrontal cortex makes, our brains, this section of our brain is one of the last sections to fully develop, and it develops way into our 20s, so probably about 25-ish, which makes a lot of sense, that when we're young, we do weird, crazy things and make bad decisions, and then you start to think that once we're like in our mid-20s, we usually start to try and get our lives together. And so that played a really big role in the paper that I was writing, because a lot of people that advocate child brides say that, like they want to do this, and, this is what they actually want, which is not possible, because if you're 9, you can't, that part of your brain is not fully developed that says, this is a good decision. Like, I need to plan this. This is, this is what I want to do with my life. When you're at that stage, you're not even self-aware yet, so you can't be making a rational decision about whether or not, you want to be married. So I think that the prefrontal cortex is a really interesting part of our brain, since it's responsible for so many important things. The other section that I wanted to talk about was, excuse me, the premotor cortex, which I also think is really interesting. It's located behind the prefrontal cortex, in between that and the motor cortices, and it's responsible for things like planning our limb movements, and it works with the other areas of our cortical regions to execute the actual movements, and it's directly attached to our brainstem area. It also helps with learning and imitation. A lot when we're babies and we're young, we learn things by imitating others. So it has a big role in that, as well as in our social cognition, things like empathy. Damage to this area can really impair self-initiated movements and impaired learning. And if you can't imitate the things that you see, then it's hard to like learn new things. Excuse me. 2 studies that I found were very interesting was the 2006 study by Schmidt and colleagues, where they found that by applying electrical stimulation to the premotor cortex caused spontaneous smiling and laughter, which I actually think is really cool. And so that led them to believe that, it's involved with the muscle contractions specifically used when we smile, not necessarily responsible for processing those feelings, but, it's part of what makes us be able to smile. And another study was 2006, was Iacoboni and DiPreto. I'm sorry if I butchered those names. they discovered the premotor cortex has what's called mirror neurons when they were studying the macaque monkey, and they found that these were firing when doing actions and observing others, and so it added more to that, you know, that it plays a role in our social cognition and learning by like imitating others. So if you're watching others do a movement, then, you know, it's easier for you to learn how to do that. So that they found that if there was damage or dysfunction to these, you know, it severely impairs your ability to learn, imitate, and, you know, in social behaviors. So they think that a dysfunction in this area and like the mirror neurons could play a major role in part of the problems with people that have autism, since they are known to sometimes have learning disabilities and, you know, issues with social interaction and, you know, understanding others and issues with empathy. So, excuse me, I'm sorry. I'm super sick right now, but those are the two areas that I wanted to talk about, and I hope it was interesting.